the opportunity to own a home, paying for it as I consume of it. He would deny you, the builder, the market, you see. So this is what sustains our prospering to the full degree that we are capable of. True credit, unexploited by these so-called banking systems. So another thing for us to get at was this AA rating that you cited, and speaking of BS, I think we should probably explain what this amounts to. I mean, people might be alarmed to a negligible degree that the United States credit rating, which the Federal Reserve note has been made the reserve currency, so-called, of the world.
Hmm.
People don't even know what reserve currency truly means, or how its ostensible principles might even serve us somehow. People don't know this. So they're having faith in something that they don't understand, and which has purposely not been explained to them. When we're asked to join in on some kind of scam, multi-level marketing Ponzi scheme, providing a product for very, very, very high cost, which is actually available already for free, or very little. I'm actually thinking of an actual situation somebody threw at me yesterday. They asked me, to explain the math of this thing as it worked out. So I'm thinking of something that was just thrown at me yesterday.
Hmm.
When we buy into these things, it's because we don't look at everything that's going on. We don't realize that all we're doing is taking, in fact, in this case, exorbitant amounts of money, and throwing them for nothing at some people at the top, and they've schemed, they've conspired to deceive us that they're delivering something which is commensurable with what we're giving up, and we're receiving, in fact, nothing, because in the case of what was offered here, it's basically software and a web presence that you can have for free, or a tiny fraction of the costs, whichever way you want to do it. And this software feat was not even achievable under present bandwidth. So the whole thing is a scam, and a friend, who's in technology notified me yesterday that all these people here locally are throwing all kinds of money at this thing. And I'm thinking, well, how stupid. And then he described the people at the meeting, and of course they have no technical background. They're just dreaming that somehow they're going to be, high in this pyramid of multi-level marketing, and because they've spent a lot of money that they're going to get something back. But you can actually do the same things that's being offered here on YouTube and on online conferencing software, which you can have for free, like Skype. You can do multi-party conference video conferencing even now, and this is a competitor to this, which is competing with something that you can have for free, and they're asking people to buy into this for like $800 a piece, and it goes up through this pyramid, and people buy into these things. Well, in the case of a banking system, the ramifications of this obfuscation are never declared, because of course, if they revealed the obfuscation, we would all protest. If we were intelligent people, there's no possible means of justifying it.
Well, as Henry Ford said, if the American people understood the way the banking system worked, there'd be a revolution before tomorrow morning.
Yes, and the remarkable thing about Ford saying something like that,
It's because he was a part of it.
well, yes, he was a part of it, but I'm not sure that he even fully understood it either. A lot of the time, what we deem to be, substantially profound remarks actually have limitations which aren't as profound as we might presume, because he didn't explain how this obfuscation was inherently terminal, and I've in 43 years I've never discovered that a prior researcher had resolved, the obfuscation into a fact that it's terminal, and what exactly explicitly were its crimes against us. I mean, why didn't he say that instead? You know, I mean, can we not understand it? Wouldn't it have been a real service to us to explain what the crime against us is exactly, so that we could identify solution? And of course, a further thing is that if you actually unravel this obfuscation to its bare facts, it's incumbent upon you to carry them forward the very little further distance that actually determines what an actual solution is. And I guess our listeners really need to understand that as well, for them to really appreciate what we're proposing. We can't just say that we're proposing to solve this. And of course, if you were elected to Parliament, they would have the only reasonable representative of an actual solution who could advocate, the thing that's going to save the people from this terminal failure that's upon us. The federal government borrowing more money into circulation can only increase the terminal sum of debt further beyond our capacity to service it. The deeper we go into this thing, the more catastrophic the inevitable consequences. When it gets to the point where we can't absorb this money because so much industry has failed and expatriated and all then the means of what I've called artificial sustention fail, and the system inevitably collapses. Artificial sustention just extends the finite lifespan beyond the point that it can naturally reach by artificial means. In fact, by in effect lending us more money through the federal government above what we can afford to service, they're breaking the rules of the system itself.
Yeah, it's no different than being on a train that's headed for the bottom of the mountain and sure destruction. And all these things, what you call artificial sustention, is just basically the engineer at the front saying, "Let's accelerate."
Right.
So that when it does come to the inevitable crack up at the bottom of the mountain, it just is worse than it ever would have been if you'd just got out of the system earlier.
It's interesting to use that analogy because about 15 years ago, I wrote an article in response to a Forbes magazine article where, I use an analogy that, basically what they were trying to tell us was that, you could get on a train, just before it crashed and somehow, pay a higher price or whatever, and this would somehow overcome the fact that it was crashing, and so all this speculation on the securities markets, which has been artificially sustained since with great aggression since Reagan was president, since when Reagan was president. We had one of the greatest stock market crashes in history, and how did they solve it? They just turned off program trading. In other words, these software engineers had written all these safeguards which said, hey, if things get this bad, we bail out before this thing does its nosedive. So basically, this software was looking at the market falling off the edge of the cliff, and it said, whoa, when it gets to this corner here and it's headed downward, and it's going to develop all this inertia because of this obfuscation of the currency, which is what it all traces back to in the end. And this is something that people have to understand, is that the crash of the stock market didn't cause the first Great Depression. This is why they spend so much effort in artificially sustaining it. So long as they can keep the prices up somewhere artificially, we have wrongful, erroneous confidence that the system is being sustained and is sustainable, but it is not a sustainable system. The first stock market, the Federal Reserve System, was promised to solve all the things that it can only cause. and it precipitated in the first Great Depression only 15 years into its existence.
That's right.
Then we have 10 years of Great Depression because our creditworthiness is destroyed. We cannot borrow further. We cannot recover. Then we have 4 years of World War. And what do they decide at the end of that? Well, a parasite can thrive better off a host that can thrive to the degree that it can, sustain the host, or enriching the host. So they grant credit worthiness, though credit worthiness has been destroyed, and rather than it being a resilient economy which recovered, the fact of the matter is they just began the thing over again. So it will escalate the original indebtedness into terminal sums of artificial indebtedness, and we can actually calculate this, and so I did. And after all the I provided all this extensive documentation to the Reagan campaign and administration in its very first moments after being elected, that any economy based on interest-bearing debt, not debt, interest-bearing debt, debts, artificial debts,
right,
subject to interest, that any economy based on interest-bearing debt ultimately terminates itself under insoluble debt, and that there was one and one only integral solution to the categoric faults of any prospective monetary proposition. And furthermore, that there was one and one only prescription for justly transforming any purported economy into mathematically perfected economy, not only immediately, but even virtually without cost. So these categoric faults are important for us to understand, and I was meaning to say that this decline in the creditworthiness of the United States to AA from what it was at AAA before.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
AAA was a lie, AA was a lie, just as all these debts that were, falsely graded by these companies, which were paid to do so, and were not accountable to their obfuscations or deceptions of the truth, which is precipitated supposedly in the failure of the banking system. What we have to understand it isn't the degeneration of these debts which is the problem or something that we can outlaw. It's the fundamental obfuscation of the currency, which instead inevitably so degenerates the debts that all debts are no good. Ultimately, any debt that we have, we will not be able to service, because as these debts continue to escalate above a circulation or remaining capacity to service debt, which is ever less of the circulation, as ever more of the circulation is dedicated to sustaining the escalating sum of indebtedness, ultimately we can't afford to sustain our industry at all. And this is why we fail. It's the fundamental obfuscation of the currency, which is what's so important for these people to understand in regard to your running for office on a platform of mathematically perfected economy.
Well, Mike, leave it to you to be kind of like a big centrifuge to spin out all the falsehoods and leave us with nothing but the truth, to get us recentered on what the real problem is here. It's not necessarily the AA, the AAA, or all the theatrics that we see. It is the obfuscation of the currency and the
exactly. And this is what's the problem with all of my plagiarists. There's actually over 25 million pages online which plagiarize my parable of perfect economy, from which there is this deduction of inevitable failure and singular solution, and yet all these constantly sprouting up purported monetary reform sites are permutating actual solution. They're giving it wrong. They're claiming that the problem is debt. Money is debt. That's, excuse me, stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Debt is not the problem. It's the multiplication of debt and the obfuscation of it into a falsified debt into the banking system, which first enriches the banking system unrightfully, so much as all the principal that's ever created. That's the first crime against us. For every penny that's created to monetize our production, the banking system is the central bank. Is enriched falsely and unjustifiably enriching to that extent, just to the principle. And then, since that's multiplied into generally threefold or fourfold or fivefold, that cost at minimal rates of interest. And of course, our short-term debts are subject to much higher rates of interest, which multiply things to far greater